thank you. This is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America. We are a nationwide nonprofit, a national coalition of unstoppable moms. And our moms and dads and students got together and sent 43 samples of school lunches to a lab in Fairfield, Iowa called Health Research Institute and tested them. We got them tested not just for glyphosate, but for 220 of the most egregious pesticides that are being used today. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Also for heavy metals, the top four most highly used or present heavy metals, for over 108 of the veterinary drugs and hormones that are used in livestock, and also for a dozen or so of nutrients. And the results were horrifying, folks. The results were way worse than what is being served to the American public in our grocery stores, and far above what we imagine. So first of all, 95.3% of the school lunch samples, of the 43 school lunch samples, were positive for glyphosate and AMPA. And AMPA is the breakdown of glyphosate and is far more toxic than glyphosate. 95%. When you look at the testing done by the Detox Project recently, it was around 60% of the samples tested from the grocery store were positive for glyphosate. And in Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, when they tested, the samples were also about 60%. So these school lunches are far more toxic than what is being served to the general American public. Also, 100% of the wheat samples, any products that had wheat in them, like the burger buns or the tortillas, crackers, pretzels, all of that, 100% of those samples were positive for glyphosate. And as far as the harmful pesticides goes, and these pesticides, some of them, cause tumors and cancer and reproductive issues, birth defects, all of that. 74% of the school lunch samples were positive for harmful pesticides. Some of them, 6, 7, maybe 9 of them were positive. The lunches and things like that were positive. I'm going to screen share real quickly just an example so you can see what the test results look like. I'll just walk you through it. So here is, for instance, a banana with multiple pesticides. When it says trace, that means it was still present, right? You can see probably a dozen pesticides here in that banana. And you can see, some of the pesticides did not show up at all, but these are 29 of the ones that did show up. And the vegetables and the fruits look like they have some of the higher levels, or the numerous, the more of different types of pesticides. Some of the highest levels were in things like, here's a mozzarella breadstick. The wheat was very high. Here's one that's 427. Oh, that's an apple. Excuse me. That's an apple, 427 parts per billion. Some of the wheat ones had very high levels. And you can see this anyway, these results, you can see them on the website. And there's all different kinds of 29 different kinds of harmful pesticides. Here's 176. That's again in a green apple. So folks, we've got to be aware that having fruits and vegetables in our school lunches is a good idea, but only if they're organic. If they're not organic, we are introducing more toxic chemicals and pesticides to our children than if they didn't eat fruits and vegetables. And this is something that I said years ago, back when Michelle Obama was getting fruits and vegetables into the food supply. I spoke up at a conference with a bunch of moms. I was not very popular. They were pretty unhappy with me. But I said, it really doesn't do any good unless we're giving them organic fruits and vegetables, because otherwise we're introducing more toxic chemicals into their system. And that's exactly what this testing shows. I'm sorry, but it has to be organic if we're going to be giving fruits and vegetables to our kids, if you want to avoid these toxic chemicals. Okay, so then next we have the levels of the heavy metals in the school lunches were, okay, I never expected this. 100% of the samples had high levels of heavy metals. Now, when you look at the numbers, it doesn't look like they're high. Okay, some of them are 2 or 7 or 5. You can see in this column right here, that's showing up here, 4, 16, 2, 4, 1, 9, 3. It doesn't look that high, but there are some that are 17, 21, 19. It goes all the way up to 94. But when you look at the levels in comparison to what the EPA allows, okay, let me just get back to that part of the article here. What the EPA allows in water of heavy metals is far lower than what is being given to our children in their food right now. Okay. In fact, thousands of times lower. The EPA's allowable level of lead in water is 0.015. And what's showing up in our food supply, in the school lunch supply, is 94. So that number is actually, okay, so let me show you this part of the article. You can see what the EPA allows: 0.01 of arsenic, 0.005 of cadmium, 0.015 of lead, and 0.002 of mercury. And then, as I showed you earlier, what's showing up is actually levels of, sorry, that's nutrients, up to 1994 times. So when you divide the levels of 0.015 of lead into the 94.4, which is showing up in our school lunches, that's 6,923 times higher than what the EPA's maximum levels are allowed in drinking water. It is very high. Okay, so very concerning, because we all know that heavy metals have shown to have harmful consequences for children's health, including mental retardation, neurocognitive disorders, behavioral disorders, respiratory problems, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Definitely not something we should be feeding the future leaders of our country. I think you would probably all agree. Okay, and then to cover the nutrient levels, basically they were all low, some of them 50% lower than what is needed for our children to have sufficient nutrients. We had an advisor who recently reviewed the results, and we added this statement. So this is a new statement we just put in today. The nutrient items are consistently very deficient in copper, and are also consistently deficient, but to a lesser extent, in calcium, potassium, and phosphorus. Magnesium, zinc, and manganese are deficient in many of the samples, roughly 50%. And the only mineral that is consistently meeting or exceeding requirements is iron. That's good, but it's not enough. So that is a recent statement from an advisor. And here's the thing about minerals, folks. I got to tell you this story. If you have not heard the story from me yet, you've got to hear the story. If you've heard it from me already before, it's not going to hurt you to hear it again. Okay, so there was a study done in Germany where a farmer noticed that the hamster population in his field, he had a monocrop farm of corn. And we know what monocrop means. That usually means GMOs with glyphosate or other toxic chemicals being sprayed in the cornfield. So he had a cornfield, and the hamster population was rapidly declining. And he wanted to know why. He was a very thoughtful farmer. And so he contacted the local university, and a scientist came out, and they decided to mimic the circumstances in their lab. So they took the hamsters from the field, they took the dirt from the field, the corn from the field, all the same circumstances, and they mimicked the environment in a lab. And what they observed was that the female hamsters, when they got pregnant, they became cannibalistic, and they ate their young on the first day of life. They also tested the hamsters to find out their vitamin and mineral content, and they realized that the hamsters were completely devoid, these female hamsters were completely devoid of vitamin B3 and tryptophan, which is a cursor to vitamin B3. But this one vitamin was completely not in their system. And when they administered that vitamin to them, the cannibalism stopped entirely, completely gone. So that has me question what vitamins might be missing, and nutrients in our food supply that our children may not be getting, that could prevent possibly behavioral issues, learning issues, violence, aggression. I mean, you have to wonder that when you see results like that in animals, right? So the vitamin content, the nutrient content of our food supply is incredibly important, and something that should be addressed way before, any type of further gun laws or whatever. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them. I'm just saying, folks, we've got to look at how we're poisoning our children with neurotoxins, in addition to all this hoopla about all kinds of, laws and restrictions and everything else that's going on with the violence with guns. We have got 2 mass shootings a day now in America, 2 a day. And it's really out of people have mental health problems. That's a fact. And if we're not addressing the mental health problems, it doesn't do any good to make more laws, because I'm sorry, but crazy people don't follow the laws. So you have to address the crazy before the laws in order to prevent any more violence. And the crazy is happening because we're feeding our families and our children neurotoxins in the food supply. That's a fact. Okay, so folks, we've had all kinds of veterinary drugs and hormones that are showing up in the school lunches. I believe this is 4 of them that are showed up in 9 different school lunches, some of them as high as 130 parts per billion. This is a tetragenic, meaning it causes birth defects, and embryonic toxicity, meaning it can cause miscarriages. Okay, and so very, very important that we clean up the food supply. These are mostly antifungals, antiparasitics, antibiotics being found in them in our school lunches. These are at high levels. And these are being found there because most of the animals and livestock are raised in confined animal feeding operations, like 3,000 pigs in a small space, or chickens or beef. And it's such unsanitary conditions that the farmers give them antibiotics to prevent them from being sick so that they can still sell them. So they're selling basically sick animals and pumped up with drugs, and our kids are eating them. Now, when I see these veterinary drugs and hormones that are at high levels in the school lunches, it makes me think of a dear friend of mine who is a school counselor at a high school. And she told me in confidence, but I'm not going to name any names. She's like, Zen, these kids are messed up. Their emotional state is just, she's like, I've never seen anything like it. This is out of control. And this was a couple of years ago. She told me this. But she said, we have, teenage girls. She said one teenage girl told her when she was crying and hormonal and upset that she got in the shower that morning, and while she was in the shower, breast milk started coming out of her breasts. Okay, this is a teenage girl just suddenly lactating. Okay, that has to be because of the hormones in the food that she's eating that cause cows to lactate more. I can't imagine why a 15-year-old, why that would happen to her. She wasn't pregnant. She just was lactating all of a sudden. I mean, these hormones and veterinary drugs are messing with our kids' reproductive issues, with their emotional state, with their mood, with their behavior, with their ability to learn. And we can't imagine a child to be able to sit in class and learn when she's in a hormonal mess, So there's a lot going on with our teenagers right now and with our young people. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really just that they have behavioral issues, or that there's bad parenting, or that we don't have enough restrictions or laws, controlling what they do? Maybe they're being exposed to endocrine disrupting hormone drugs and chemicals and heavy metals that are no neurotoxins. And maybe our kids are victims of this toxic system. Maybe a lot of this, sexual identity and transgenderism and birth defects that are happening, and mental health issues and lack of sleeplessness and learning disorders and all that. Maybe a lot of that could be connected back to these endocrine disrupting chemicals and heavy metals and toxins and pesticides in the food supply. Maybe. Okay. So I think we need to have some compassion for these kids and take a look at what's going on and how they're being poisoned. And we need to take action. Okay. So here's what I ask everybody to do is please sign this letter at the bottom of our article. If you click on the link at the very bottom of the article, you can see this letter, and it says, stop poisoning our students with toxic school lunches. We demand that Congress and the USDA take immediate actions to eliminate toxins and provide safe, nutrient-dense foods for students. So we're asking you to please sign this letter. We do not share your information. It only asks for your address and zip code and stuff to direct it to the proper congressperson. So we really need to get on it. There's only 84 people that have taken action, guys. It needs to be thousands of people telling the USDA and Congress to get their butts in gear and to do something about it. Okay. So that's what we ask you to do as far as letting people know. And please share the article. The article is not showing up on Google search because we are being censored. And, it's probably being censored across Facebook and, other places as well. So please share the article. And I'm going to show you again one more time where to click for that letter. So all the way at the bottom of the article, underneath where it talks about where we got the samples were from 18 cities and 15 states. Thank you very much to the students who went into their schools and bought, the school lunches and brought them home, and whose parents froze them, and whose parents went to the post office and spent their own money. Some of them spent like $95 to FedEx these lunches overnight. These parents really made a big difference for the rest of the nation, and I really want to thank them and acknowledge them. And right down here is where you can click to send a letter to our government. Okay, so it says click here, and there you go. So that's what we're asking everybody, thousands and thousands of people, to do. Please sign this letter today. Okay, and then what you can do about the school lunches. Listen, I understand that a lot of people cannot afford to send their kids to school with lunches, but I would ask you to maybe readjust your thinking and think about, can you afford organic rice and beans? Because most people can. And organic rice and beans, this is an article that just talks about rice and beans, it being cheap and the prices on it. Bag of rice can be $3.89, 5-pound bag. That's for not organic. But if you get organic, it might be maybe $2 or $3 more for an organic bag of rice. And here's the portions. This is the cost for non-organic. It's $1.19. So I would guess for organic, we're going to be costing this out. We're going to have volunteers work on this, but my guess is for organic, it would be about $2. And so it is a little bit more. But here's the thing. What do you get for that? You get proper nutrients. You get, not having dozens of toxic chemicals and heavy metals in your child's food. Your child gets to purge those toxic chemicals out of their system. And the studies show from Friends of the Earth and many other different places out there that within 1 to 2 weeks, if you switch to organic, those pesticides will leave the body, and anywhere from 70 to 100% of those pesticides, the levels won't be detectable through urine, right? So you can, in a very short time, make a difference for your child by switching to organic, and it's worth it. So I'm going to tell you another story. A dear friend of mine in Southern California, her friend is in Santa Ana. I've actually interviewed her before, and her child was about 9 years old at the time. At the time of the beginning of the story. Okay. And when the child was about 9 years old, he had a lot of behavioral issues, and he was going to a public school. He was eating the public lunches. She was buying him regular American food. And she told the school that he had mental health issues, and they did not listen to her. And then one day they called her and said, your son just threatened to find, with a bomb to blow up the whole school and kill people in it. So you have to come pick him up. And she said, well, I told you he has mental health issues and I need help. And she was a single mom with 4 kids, low income, and really needed help. And so finally they said, okay, we'll send you to a psychiatrist with your son. So they went to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist met with the son. And after the session, the psychiatrist said, here you go, here's some medication for your son. And she said, that's it for the rest of his life? Nothing else? What about the side effects? What about, something else? How else can we help them besides putting him on drugs? And the psychiatrist said, well, it's either these pills or you think about what you're feeding him. And she said, what do you mean? And he said, well, what are you feeding him? And she's like, well, he eats pizza and hot dogs and cheeseburgers and whatever I can get into him, macaroni and cheese and stuff like that, and tacos and burritos, things like that. And so he said, well, have you ever thought about the toxins, the pesticides and the chemicals, the food additives, preservatives in the food? She said, no. And he said, well, you can either go organic or you can take this medication. So she decided, as a single mom with 4 kids, to go organic. And she bought rice and beans and very bulk food as much as possible. And that kid only ate organic. And for 2 weeks later, a teacher from the school called her and said, whatever you are doing, keep doing it because it's working. And at the time of the call, when she called me to tell me this, her son was 16 and there had just been another school shooting. And she said, I know in my heart that if I had not done this, my son would have been one of those kids that was able to buy a gun now, 16, 17, 18 years old, would have been able to get his hands on a gun and would have shot up his kids at his school. And I know, because I learned about GMOs and pesticides from organizations like yours, my son will not do that. He is happy, he's clear-minded, he is responsible, and he is not going to be violent and kill other people. So when I think about this, I get all choked up because that kid's life is forever changed because his mom found out about GMOs and toxic pesticides, and his classmates' lives and their families' lives. Like hundreds, if not thousands of people are affected because that kid did not bring a gun to school and kill his classmates. And that's what's possible when you think about how can I rearrange my budget so that my child can eat organic? That's what's possible. You could save lives. And so that's why we did the school lunch testing. And that's why we want you to know about GMOs and toxic chemicals in the food supply and heavy metals and the lack of nutrients and veterinary drugs and hormones. You deserve the right to know of what's going on in our food supply, and your child deserves safe food. And if we have to take matters into our own hands and rearrange our budgets and buy consignment clothes and not buy the latest phone and not go on a fancy vacation, just go camping instead, and cut down our budgets so that we can afford to buy organic food for our kids and only send them to school with organic food, well then by God, we should do that. Okay, it's up to us and it's time for us to do that. So thank you everybody for watching this. Please go to momsacrossamerica.org and check out this article and share it. And folks, if you could send it to like Joe Rogan or Jimmy Dore or just big outlets that can get this, I don't care, CBS, NBC, whatever, if you can get this news out to them. Here is the press release. There's a short press release here. Please get this information out to the news outlets, and let's make sure that our kids have safe and healthy food. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Take care.